have found a superb story for this week.
It sounds good. Yeah, that sounds good. Mine isn't laugh out loud funny, but it's very interesting. It's certainly no Catullus. It's no Priapus. It's certainly no... Who's the chap that pranked a random old lady?
Oh, yeah. Oh, what was his name? I can't remember his name. In London, where he just ordered every single tradesman in London to turn up to a house at the same time.
It's not one of those. I haven't got one of those.
Scared the shit out of her. Oh, don't worry, I have.
Excellent. Well, in that case, it might make more sense for me to go first.
Okay.
And then we can leave listeners with the teaser of your ridiculously silly one.
Okay, well, before we do that, let's be really boring and do an intro.
Go for it.
Hello and welcome to That Was Genius. We've given it away a little bit already with a silly history podcast in which two friends who used to be on different sides of the world now are just a mere couple of 100 miles apart discuss history stories on a topic each week. We decide the topic the week in advance, although due to scheduling errors, it was actually decided 2 days ago, so this episode's going to be quality. And the story is decided a couple of days in advance, but we don't have any idea what the other person is going to talk about. It's fun, it's hilarious, it's got bum jokes, That Was Genius. What's our topic this week, Tom?
It's body parts, isn't it?
It is body parts.
It's body parts, and just to add to the silliness, I'm doing an Australian topic again.
Oh, excellent!
So Australia,
is there a murder?
No, yes. Well, no. No, there isn't.
Is it a story of survival?
Arguably worse. No, it's not. No. That,
oh shit! Something new.
Arguably worse again. It's a sort of a racial story of survival.
Oh, good.
So
you can combat the inherent racism in anything to do with Australia by doing an Australian accent. We do Australia quite a lot, don't we? We do. It's a good source of stupid history stories, though.
It really is. It really is. When you research almost anything that's slightly silly, you come up with Australian examples, don't you? Getting lost, Australia. Cannibalism, Australia. Serial killers, Australia. They've got everything in their history. Bearing in mind it's only, a couple of 100 years old.
Yeah, they packed it in, haven't they?
Yeah. Did you explore the Catholic relic route for this week? Because that was the obvious route, wasn't it? It
was the obvious route, yes. And other than the fact that Jesus has about a dozen foreskins dotted churches around the world.
Dotted around the world. Oh.
Yes. Other than Jesus' prolific supply of foreskins, some of which have gone missing, some of which have been used as rings, apparently, over the years by various saints and popes.
How strange for a Catholic to do that.
Yes, I'll avoid jokes about small boys' penises.
Exactly.
So I did look it up, and then a lot of it seems to have been done. You know, the relics are a little bit cliche in a way.
Exactly. I'm glad you... I thought the same thing. I almost went down that route, even though I knew it was cliche. But I tried to avoid St. Bartholomew's butt plug or... Mary's little toe.
Rabbit.
Yeah. There are some very odd ones. But no, I avoided relics. The other obvious route, when I initially started my research, was famous people who have had parts of their body preserved.
Yes.
There's a lot of examples of that, isn't it? Particularly if you're a communist leader. They seem to have a real ego, don't they?
Yes. In fact, I've seen quite a few embalmed communist leaders in my lifetime.
I've seen Lenin, and I've seen Ho Chi Minh. Oh, no, I haven't seen Lenin. I haven't seen Lenin. I've seen Ho Chi Minh.
Very short Lenin. Very small
Is
man.
He? Very short. Caused a lot of trouble, though, for his relative to his height.
Yes, double concentrated. Double concentrated communist leader. Made with real Soviet juice.
So there's Lenin, isn't there? There's Ho Chi Minh.
Yeah. Oh, I've seen Mao.
Mao's still there as well, is he?
Yeah, he's quite small.
There's a couple of North Korean leaders as well, aren't there, that have been preserved?
Oh, I think there's only been 2 North Korean leaders, haven't there, so far?
Oh, probably right.
2 dead ones.
Kim Jong-un and Kim Jong-il, is it? Kim Jong...
Kim Il-sung.
Oh, and then there's a sequel, Kim Jong-de.
Yeah. Kim Jong Final Blood. Kim Jong Rise of the Machines.
Rise of the Machines. And then I didn't realise there were lots of other smaller communist leaders from other smaller countries that have been embalmed as well. It was all the rage. It must have been all the rage during the 1900s.
Yes.
Yes. Anyway, yes. So good topic.
I didn't in the end, but I started off looking at body snatchers, or resurrection men as they were often called, and again, that's been done to death, ha ha ha, so to speak.
Yeah.
But I did discover that there was a craze in the 1840s to 1860s for putting booby traps in graves, putting shotguns and landmines in graves, so that when you opened up the coffin, it would blow your head off.
That would scare the shit out of you, wouldn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Even better, just have like a writing mechanism, so that when the coffin lid is taken, is pulled off, the corpse just flips up. Eyeballs shoot out. You can have a lot of fun with it, couldn't you?
You could, yeah.
It could get very Indiana Jones. A leg kicks up. Kicks the person in the arse.
Yes.
Or be buried with snakes.
With a gramophone record that says, "Take that, you bastard." Take that, you bastard.
Yeah, very, very good. I ended up going down a grave robbing, body snatcher sort of route. And it's interesting. I came across quite a few interesting examples of indigenous individuals sort of being hunted for trophies.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, there's quite a number of good examples of this. And I didn't realise, and it was something I almost did, which was New Zealand Maoris, who many of them traditionally have tattoos all over their face, and I think it's associated with how noble they are in the tribe. So the more noble you are, the more tattoos you have, but particularly on your face. And I think it's called there's one beneath the bottom lip, which is called a maki mono, I think. Anyway, I may have got quite a lot of that information incorrect. Anyway, headhunting was quite popular amongst Maori tribes, and also many white settlers got involved in this. So you'd have a collection of heads just for the tattoo art.
Jesus,
very, very morbid.
That is very morbid. Yeah.
Yeah, but there's heaps of examples of trophy hunting, isn't there? Even up until the Iraq and Afghan wars.
Well, yes, actually, it was very common in World War II as well. For
American and Japanese.
American and Japanese would take trophies off each other, particularly teeth and skulls.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Incredibly morbid. Incredibly morbid. Anyway.
Speaking of incredibly morbid, one of the other things I looked up was some of the art macabre of the 16th and 17th centuries. Which was kind of beautiful in a way, but also rather horrible. It was exploring the fragility of life by using the dead as sculptures. And basically, it seemed to use a lot of kids, bodies of kids, who would be posed so that they were and preserved so that their skeletons were reading books made of their own skin, or they were playing with a yo-yo made of their own hearts. Horrible.
Fuck, that's weird.
Horrible.
That is really weird, isn't it?
Yeah. So I also, and I didn't do this as well, but I also went down the route of sourcing skeletons for doctors over history.
Which is again similar to my topic.
It turns out that the best skeletons, if you want a good skeleton, you go and find a Frenchman. Frenchmen make the best world-renowned anatomical skeletons because they're always in very good condition. Although, because of the numbers of guillotine victims and the errors in storage, you'd quite often find a skeleton with a mismatched head. But other than that, they were treated so that they didn't leak grease and smell in summer, which the other skeletons at the time did. And British skeletons...
How rude of those skeletons.
I know, not to leak everywhere.
Is this when they were walking along the street, these skeletons?
Yeah, just leaving a trail of grease and marrow behind them.
Can you please treat yourself properly?
Come on, have some respect, man.
Have some heart. Sorry. I didn't mean to point that out to you. I know it's a sensitive subject, your skeleton.
Cruel. But apparently, yes, the British were the worst because pollution and poor diet and workhouse conditions meant that British skeletons were quite often really badly deformed and miscoloured. And
discoloured.
Yeah, apparently British skeletons always came out yellow like nicotine. So there you go. And if you were a really poor doctor, you'd find a skeleton made of odds and sods. So you'd have a skeleton with two arms of completely different lengths to practice on. But it was quite limited in what you could talk about with that, so I didn't go down that route. So I found a ridiculously silly one. But I think, as we said, we're going to let you go first, aren't we?
I was just thinking about the heads of French. So you'd often get mismatching heads. How do you know if it's the right head? Does it fit like a Lego, like a puzzle piece? Does it just clip in nicely? And you go, that's the right head.
I was trying to do a pop noise, but couldn't.
Yeah, don't fight it in. Don't try to wrestle it in. It's probably just not the right head. If it fits in just snug, that's the right head for you.
Yeah, you don't want to try and put a square vertebra in a round stem, do you? Round brain stem, do you?
Very, very gross. Yes. Anyway, so you've touched on it already. I am doing a topic that involves body snatching, science, and Aboriginal Australians.
Excellent.
Yeah, so we are going Australian again. Yeah. And I'm actually going back to the same part of Australia and the same time in Australia as I visited a few weeks ago with the story of cannibalistic serial killer Alexander Pearce. So I'm going 19th century Tasmania again. And
excellent.
I'll try and be a little bit more innovative in future weeks, but I thought this was a very, very good example.
Yeah, I mean, Tasmania has changed a lot in 130 years. It's changed about 20 years, whilst the rest of the world's changed 130. But it's changed, and I think we need to respect that.
And Australians have changed, haven't they? They're only mildly racist now.
They are, yes.
Yeah,
changing times.
They're moving in the right direction. So there are a few recurring themes, aren't there, when we talk about Australian history? We've touched on them already. Europeans getting lost, Australians laughing at their incompetence, and then the other one is Aboriginal Australians being treated like shit, which is the major theme of my topic this week. So here's a brief summary for people who don't know much about Australian history of European treatment of Aboriginal Australians. So, white man arrives on continent. White man fucks over black man. Audacious black man retaliates. White man doesn't think this is very nice. White man commits ethnic genocide. White man surprised when remaining black man turned to alcohol. So that's a kind of summary of relations between white settlers and Aboriginal Australians.
I feel like we should qualify that alcoholism and drugs, whilst they are a large problem, it's not entirely endemic. There are plenty of people who aren't glue sniffing.
No, that's true. There are plenty who are, though.
I feel like in your attempt to ridicule white attitudes towards native peoples in colonised countries, what you may have done is slightly perpetuated modern myths. I know you didn't mean to, but I'd like to point out that that's what you just did.
I know, I did mean to. I'm trying to be nasty to both sides, but I'm going to be taking the piss 90% out of white settlers and only 10% out of our Aboriginals. If that's fair, I think.
Yes, I can always edit.
Let me take you then, like I did 3 episodes ago, back to Van Diemen's Land, so modern-day Tasmania, off the south coast of the Australian mainland. So in the first quarter of the 19th century, white settlers and Aborigines weren't... And by the way, I might use the term Aborigines. I'm not sure if that's politically correct anymore, but I say it without any racist undertones. He says, having just made an alcoholism joke.
Yes.
White settlers and Aborigines won't get along too well in Van Diemen's Land, so it does take two to tango. So I'm sure that the Aborigines weren't always the most pleasant neighbours, but it is worth pointing out that they actually had occupied Australia for a rather long time. And and the white settlers had only just turned up and were quickly trying to take over everything.
Yes.
The greedy white man is a common epithet, isn't it, expressed by indigenous cultures in most colonised areas of the world.
Yes, can't think where most colonised areas of the world get that idea from.
Yep.
Carry on.
Anyway, the white settlers were frequently killing Aborigines that they encountered and kidnapping the women and children. So the government itself was awarding bounties for the capture of Aborigines so they could be civilised, in inverted commas, and resettled to areas that the white settlers didn't want. So in 1803, there were around 5,000 to 7,000 Aborigines on the island of Tasmania. By 1861, so just under 60 years later, there were about 6. Although heaps more of mixed descent. Just an incredible drop in numbers.
Astonishing.
It pretty much is a genocide. Anyway, the white settlers were frequently killing Aborigines they encountered, just because they could. There was even a chap called George Robinson who was appointed protector of the Aborigines. And now there's a very misleading title.
Is that like a gamekeeper? I get the feeling it's like a gamekeeper.
That's a fantastic analogy. That's pretty much what it was.
Oh, Jesus.
That's pretty much exactly what it was. So Robinson oversaw the relocation of 134 Aborigines to Flinders Island, which is a smaller island between mainland of Australia and Tasmania. And here the Aborigines were out of the way and could be, inverted commas, civilised and turned into Christians. And Flinders Island was shit, by the way. So it was cold, windy, and many of those people died of disease. In 1842, Robinson found a 7-year-old boy and the rest of his family and had them taken to Flinders Island. And the 7-year-old boy was a chap called William Lanne. I think his surname's pronounced Lane, although it has 2 N's. And we don't know this chap's original Aboriginal name. William Lanne was the youngest of his family. He became a whaler at the age of 20, settled down living alongside white settlers, and his life was pretty uneventful. But what happened after his death is fascinating. He died at the age of 34, and it says a lot about the attitudes of white settlers to Aborigines. As his body lay in a morgue in Hobart, a battle began to rage between the Royal College of Surgeons in London and the Royal Society of Tasmania over who should get his body. And why was that? Because he was thought...
Why was that, Tom?
Because he was thought to be one of the last purebred, and I can't think of a better term, I know that's a horrible use of the term purebred, Tasmanian Aboriginal. Presumably because all of the other ones had either been killed, raped, or forced into integrating with European culture after, inverted commas, re-education. So he was one of the last remaining 100% Aboriginal Australians from Tasmania. So what do you do with the body of a dead Aboriginal Tasmanian, Sam?
That is well, other than fight about who gets to keep it.
Yeah, perhaps you respect the culture's burial practices. You know, that would be a nice thing to do, wouldn't it?
No.
How about maybe returning his body to his tribe and letting them deal with it?
Oh, fuck off. He's he's the last one anyway. What are they
Where are you going to go? Yeah.
He's like the last Rolo. You don't put the last Rolo back in the pack, Tom. God. You dissect it for science.
Boom. Thank you very much. Or maybe you just cut him up to prove your suspicions that Aborigines are subhumans more closely related to gorillas. And yes, that's pretty much what was going on here. So welcome to Australia, folks. Yes, that's right. It's racism, pure and simple. The game that any Australian can play. So, a chap called William Crowther requested access to the body of William Lanne, but his claim was denied. So Crowther, a politician incidentally, and an honorary medical officer, decided, and now prepare yourself for this, Sam, because it gets really quite awful now.
As opposed to before.
No, that was just a build-up. This chap Crowther decided to break into the morgue with his son, cut off Lane's head, remove the skull, replace it with the skull of a random corpse found in a neighbouring room, and leg it with Lane's skull.
Oh,
Crowther managed this by distracting the man working at the morgue by inviting him round for tea, not being there for tea, and getting his wife to make small talk for as long as possible.
It's a classic heist movie in the making.
It is. It's the classic 1-2, isn't it? It's that old egg,
Yeah.
That old chestnut.
Someone has to play the patsy, don't they? Isn't that a role in heists?
I don't know. I've never seen Heists. Is it? That's a Netflix, is it?
No, well, heists is in tradition like Ocean's 11 and Italian Job and things like that.
Yeah.
Isn't there someone called the patsy? I don't know if that's the person who's framed for it or what.
Oh, I don't know. Possibly. You can put that out to listeners.
What role would this person have in a classic comedy heist movie about stealing the head of the last indigenous Tasmanian?
And showing zero respect for his culture, yeah. When the theft was discovered, the Royal Society of Tasmania, here represented by a chap called George Stokel, keen to maintain the moral high ground here, Sam.
Of course, very important in such situations.
So they decided to cut off the hands and feet of Lanne, hide them in a library to prevent any further attempts to collect samples of Lanne. Which makes total sense, doesn't it? So rather than maybe have heightened security around the morgue, maybe bury him surreptitiously, no, that's not sensible. Cutting off his hands and feet is sensible.
And hiding them in the library. Whereabouts in the library did they hide them? In which section, according to the Dewey Decimal System?
I may have been wrong, actually. It may have been a museum. Either way, it would be a bit of a surprise, wouldn't it? If you went to fix the toilet cistern and there was a hand and a foot wedged in The remains of Lane's body were buried a few days after all this in a rather large funeral. His burial was organised by his old whaling ship boss, who incidentally paid for the whole thing. And there were a whole host of Lane's colleagues.
Very generous.
Yeah.
Cooperative.
Well, it's actually interestingly, and
actually, fishermen had cooperatives for funerals, didn't they?
Oh, did they?
To pay for their burials. Yeah, well, it was very common, yeah. Workers' cooperatives for funerary costs.
Well, it's actually very interesting. So this is going to take you by surprise, Sam, but I actually did quite a lot of research this week, and I read some rather large... One of them was 20 pages long, documents about this story. And it's interesting when you really look into it in depth, that not every single white settler was a racist bastard, it's worth pointing out. There were a lot of people who were actually appalled by this, really, really appalled by what happened here. Admittedly, it was largely driven by the fact that they didn't want their bodies to be cut up or stolen, rather than the fact that it was an Aboriginal Australian who was just being used as a...
Yes, doing this to anyone equals bad.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. Or more about, I don't want it to happen to me. But this chap, William Lanne, had a lot of strong friends, people he'd been fishing with, and he had pallbearers, and there were a lot of people who attended his funeral. A lot of them were white settlers, a lot of them were mixed race, part Aboriginal. There were a lot of white settlers and people in the area who were actually a lot nicer than old Crowther and Stokel.
You don't need to be nice when you've got science on side, Tom.
It is interesting, isn't it? It's very interesting.
I think that's where a lot of the dehumanisation... On the serious side, I think that's where a lot of the dehumanisation comes from, is because you claim that you don't need humanity when you're being a scientist. And that's how people disassociate.
It's very poignant. Yeah, it is very poignant. And it's also a time where... Darwin's Origin of the Species, I think that was 1860s, was it 1869 maybe? We're at a time where there's just endemic racism. So... White people were discovering these indigenous cultures. They look very different. So Aboriginal Australians do look very different. They're not only is it their skin pigmentation that's different, but their whole face structure is very different. And rather than start from the perspective of this is a human being, let's explore how Aboriginal Australians are different. It's this person is a gorilla. Or it's actually this person is subhuman. This person isn't as good as us. Let's explore how they're worse than us. It's really very awful. And Australian, I mean, I only slightly touched on it. I have not researched Australian history as well as I could, but it's truly horrendous. It's genocidal how Aboriginals across the continent were treated. It is horrendous. Anyway.
Tell a joke, Tom. Tell a bum joke.
I told you it's a very interesting topic. It's not necessarily inherently funny. A few days after his burial, a gravedigger...
I'm trying, but I'm struggling.
I'm trying to make it funny. I mean, I've made some alcoholism jokes, but that's the best I could do with the material. A few days after his burial...
Now I have to leave them in, because you reference them again.
A few days after his burial, a gravedigger found his coffin exposed, the body removed, a skull discarded on the floor, and blood everywhere.
The third skull in a row. His skull's gone, a random skull's been replaced it, and now that skull's gone, and a third skull's in its place.
Exactly. They've gone to the spare skull shop, and they've bought a few extra, just in case they need them. Would you like an Aboriginal one, sir? They're quite rare. Oh no, any old one will do. Just give us a white skull. That's absolutely fine. So his whole body was removed, and it would appear that Crowther had stolen the body. Now, rumour has it that Stokel, this is the chap who took the moral high ground by cutting off the hands and feet, actually made a purse out of some of Lane's skin. And there was also rumour that other scientists around Stokel took choice pieces of the body as their own trophies.
Fuck's sake.
Oh, I don't know. Whatever happened to the majority of Lane's body is not known with any certainty. It has been argued that his body was sent to the Royal College of Surgeons in London by Crowther. It has also been argued that the skull ended up in the University of Edinburgh. Neither theory has been decisively proved, but these things have been debated right up until, I think, the 90s. I think the University of Edinburgh was approached and studies were done to see if any of the skulls were Lane's. Nothing decisive. In reality, there's a strong argument that both Stokel and Crowther had very little interest in Lane's body parts for scientific reasons. Rather, they just had some morbid desire to possess parts of him as trophies. And
they were just bastards.
They were just bastards.
Who'd have thunk based on the story so far? They seem so trustworthy.
Around the same time, incidentally, that Crowther had sent the body to the Royal College of Surgeons, one of the very senior surgeons there who specialised in studying skulls had actually basically come to the conclusion that you couldn't get any serious scientific results from looking at skulls. You couldn't look at an Aboriginal skull versus a white man's skull and say anything of any scientific worth, really, about where they sit in the evolutionary spectrum. So all in all, a very, very, very strange affair. But what is fascinating about it is it says so much about the attitude of white settlers to Aborigines, and also, as you've touched on, the willingness of scientific organisations to completely ignore any ethics in the pursuit of science. In a similar vein...
Yes, or a trophy.
Yeah, or a trophy or something to hang off their belt. In a similar vein, Lane's wife, a lady called Truganini, who is also 100% Aboriginal Tasmanian, died in 1876. She demanded that she be cremated and her ashes spread over the, now prepare yourself for this, Don Trecasto Channel, which is quite a mouthful, which is north of Tasmania, between Tasmania and the mainland. And she was scared of what would happen to her body after what had happened to Lane's body.
Yeah, damn right.
Her body was buried. Good start. Despite the fact that she asked for it to be cremated. It was dug up after 2 years, put on display until 1947 in a museum, and finally cremated in 1976. I don't... What exactly? You laughed because it was that or crying, wasn't it?
Yeah. So that was really we'll get round to it.
I know. God awful. Absolutely awful. I didn't write this down in my notes either, but Truganini is a good example of what was going on with relations between Tasmanian Aboriginals and white settlers, because she was one of numerous siblings, and I think one of her siblings was stolen by whalers and basically forced to marry someone. Another one, a brother was shot. Just her story, just the story of what happened to her and her immediate relatives, was just a great example of what was happening to all of these Tasmanian Aboriginals in the face of aggressive, greedy white settlers. Finish that up with a bit of comic relief then, Sam. Over to you.
Well, thank you, Tom. What a treat. Fortunately, and in a complete turnabout of tone and style, this week, Tom, I've been looking at the mythology of the anus.
Excellent. Mythology of the anus. Talking of mythology of the anus, what did I forgot to make a note of this. There is a term for shoving a piece of ginger up your bum.
Oh, yes. Yes, there is. And it's not a bit of pep and ginger for kind of... well, actually, it might be. That might be where that comes from.
Figging.
When you say someone's got get up and go, they've got a bit of pep and ginger. It's a bit of Victorian terminology, which might actually be shoving ginger up your arse.
It's called figging.
Figging.
And I've just Googled that, so again, I'm going to get some rather interesting adverts. But figging.
Yes. As in the traditional Christmas carol, bring us some figging pudding.
I think that's frigging. Give us some fucking pudding. Just give us some figging pudding. I wish you a Merry Christmas.
Oh, that's going to set the bells a ringing.
It was done as a punishment, wasn't it? It was done for so if you had a naughty slave, male or female, so the male would obviously get a bit of ginger shoved up their bum, and a female would get it shoved up the other bit. They'd get pinned down for half an hour, and apparently it was excruciatingly painful.
I bet it bloody was. Where did people get that idea from?
I don't know. Maybe someone slipped.
Horrible.
Maybe someone slipped and fell on a bit of ginger, and went into ED and said, "I just slipped and I fell on a bit of ginger." Then it went right up my bum. But why, sir, is there a giant dildo, a gerbil, a roll of toothpaste, and a toothbrush up your bum as well?
Well, have you ever heard of the old woman who swallowed a fly?
Well, I swallowed the contents of a bathroom.
Yeah. Got this mental image now of walking into A&E with just a gingerbread man's legs sticking out your bumhole.
A live gingerbread man. Oh, help!
Not my gumdrop buttons!
All I was doing was running as fast as I can. Oh, look where it ended up. Run as fast as you can. You can't catch me. Oh, I have. And yeah, I'm shoving it up my ass.
I'll just hide in this darkened room.
And wiggled and tiggled inside her.
Wonderful. Well, I like how, even though I've managed to talk about the mythology of the anus, you immediately go on to punishing slaves again. You're having a bad week, aren't you? Jesus. 1 week back in the UK in February and you've turned into a bloody Russian novelist in your outlook on life. And then it got worse. You're like a regular Chekhov now.
A regular Chekhov.
As opposed to an irregular Chekhov who only poos once a week. Anyway, Tom... Yes, speaking of pooing once a week, the mythology of the anus. It turns out there is actually quite a bit of a mythological ani.
Anusology.
Anusology. Yes, there's quite a lot of mythological proctology. China, for example, has got various names. It's got mythological gold-eating lions who stole the treasure of the gods and ate it, and so the gods sealed their anuses as punishment, making the lions like giant millionaires' piñatas, so that when you split them open, gold would come flying out.
Right. I thought you said the gods. I thought you meant the gods sealed up their own anuses. I was about to say that's
No. That's not when they were keeping their. That's not when they were keeping their treasure.
I'll learn them. Watch me.
Yeah, never ask a Chinese god for a pound coin for the trolleys at the supermarket. Got change for a tenner, oh mighty one. Yes, and Japan has the Shrime.
Just imagine a Chinese god reclined in a trolley in an Asda car park, pissed as fuck.
Yeah, drinking special brew and Buckfast. Hanging around outside the bookies. So yes, Japan has the Shrime, and I think you'll like the Shrime, Tom. They are distant relatives of the Kappa. I don't know how good your Japanese is, Tom, but Shrime translates as buttocks eye.
Buttocks eye?
Yes, it's a demon, Tom, with an eye for a bum.
Well, of course it is.
Whose sole purpose in Japanese mythology is to jump out at travelling samurai, strip off, wink at them, and then disappear back into the woods.
Saucy. These poor travellers. God, don't visit Japan, folks, because all sorts of weird
don't
things.
Walk.
It's always travellers that are being picked on. Christ.
Poor drunk samurai walking home, isn't it?
Yeah.
Being invited into the cottage of the enormous testicled raccoon and being winked at by the bum-eye demon.
I think it says a lot about the quality of the alcohol being served through Japanese history, yes. Laced with LSD, I think.
Well, yes.
For this topic, I briefly looked into South American history, Mayan, Aztec, that sort of stuff.
Ah, I thought you were going to jump on me then, because I'm doing Native American today.
Ah, okay. But honestly, some of the Mayan and Aztec mythology is fucking bonkers. I swear yes. A lot of that has come from, taking some rather hallucinogenic beans or leaves.
There's plenty of delicious fluorescent frogs to lick. So anyway, Tom, off the back of the Shrime, or buttocks eye demon, I found my story for the week, and I am equally ashamed and proud of myself for this one, Tom. It is an origin story from native North America, and it's the story of how one of our most important body parts got its appearance, and also how certain animals got their whiskers. Now, this is a brilliantly silly story. Like, genuinely, I have been pissing myself reading the full story, so I thoroughly encourage the rest of the audience, I'll tell you in a second where you'll find it, to go and read this. And it's inspired me to do a lot more reading into Native American folk and myth.
Because it's stupid.
Because
you're so
brilliant.
Childish, Sam.
No, the stories are genuinely brilliant.
That's what inspires you. Stupidity.
So good. I'm an atheist, but I like the idea of having a disrespectful religion. And what Native America has is a disrespectful religion. Their gods are there to be mocked, which I like.
That's good. Yeah, that sounds good.
Yeah. Now, because Native Americans had an oral storytelling tradition, there are literally 100, probably 1,000 variations on the story I'm going to tell today, most of which were never captured or translated. Inevitably white or kind of Western-educated Native Americans wrote these stories down. Obviously, you're just getting one person's snapshot of a story that's been passed down for thousands of years. So I'm working off two versions of the same story today. One from the Winnebago tribe of Nebraska, translated by Sam Blowsnake and John Baptiste in 1912.
I'm guessing Sam Blowsnake is Native American?
Yes, he was.
Not
So
a
he was the
wrestler.
translator.
Okay.
Yeah, no. And John Baptiste, who was a wrestler. So that was from 1912, and there's one from the Blackfoot tribe of Montana, which appears in a 1908 book from the American Museum of Natural History, which is called Mythology of the Blackfoot Indians by Clark Vissler and D.C. Duval, which is available online. The entire thing's available online, and while some of the opinions in it are, let's just say, white Americans talking about Native Americans in the early 20th century, somewhat dated view of interhuman relations, the stories in the book are fucking brilliant. They are so rude. And so funny.
I like the way you're trying to make this sound classy by citing.
I know. Look at me go.
Supplying a biography. A bibliography.
Yeah, a bibliography. The only reason I'm really mentioning it is because you can find this book online. Do go and read it. It's fucking hilarious. It's brilliant. The full length of stories are like 300 pages. I've not finished it yet, but it's good. And I've got a brilliant mental image of two stuffy academics sitting around a campfire whilst being told incredibly bawdy stories, getting increasingly hot and flustered.
I've got an even better one of two wrestlers
I was trying to look...
sitting around a bonfire, listening to the story. Oh my god, that's amazing! You would not believe what this guy told me.
And then the son did what?
Get out of here!
So anyway, the story that I'm telling today is called Old Man Roasts Squirrels. That's the Blackfoot version. The Winnebago version is called Trickster Catches Ducks, but it's the same story. Old Man and Trickster are one and the same character, the same person. And Old Man is the Native American creator. He's the creation god who forced the earth to rise from the ocean. But the religion is one really of mockery. So far from being a force for good and someone to be worshipped, he's seen in most of these stories as an incompetent fool at absolute best. At absolute best, he's an idiot. And at worst, he's a curmudgeonly arsehole who holds grudges.
Like most old men.
Like most gods. Yes. He has long since abandoned the world and gone elsewhere to cause trouble, so you don't have to worry about him popping up and causing mischief, and is absolutely not someone to be worshipped. He is just there to be laughed at, which I think is a brilliant way to approach religion. So, Tom, Old Man Roasts Squirrels, or or the more accurate title, How Your Bumhole Got Wrinkled.
Right.
And also, how the links came to be. Incidentally, this story was collected at exactly the same time as Rudyard Kipling was writing his Just So stories, so do get ready to compare and contrast. And so from this point on, I'm not reading it verbatim, but I'm more or less just going to tell the story from now, because I've gone on for long enough. Old Man was walking along one day, and he heard some squirrels playing a game. The squirrels would roll around together in the ashes of an old fire until one of them couldn't stand the pain from the hot embers and would scream, and the other would therefore be the winner. Old Man, being hungry, thought, aha! And challenged the squirrels in his cunning way to join in the game, saying that all three of them would roll around in the ashes, but they all had to keep their eyes closed, and the last one to scream in pain won. Now, as soon as the squirrels lay down in the ashes, he covered them up and quickly roasted them alive, and then sat down for dinner.
Cheeky little bugger.
The little bastard. In the other version, he finds some ducks who want to sing and sings with them, but they all have to keep their eyes closed to enjoy the beautiful music, and as they close their eyes and sing, he rings their necks one by one. Nice. He's a little shit. So when he'd eaten all he could, there was still lots of meat left, so he hung it above the ground for safety, so he could have it for breakfast and got ready for bed. But whilst he slept, Tom, he always had his little friend watching his back. And little friend is a quote from the original translation.
Joe Pesci. Who is this?
Close enough, Tom. His friend Tom was called Little Brown Eye.
Right. Yes.
Yes, Tom. Whilst he slept, his arsehole would watch the meat to make sure no one stole it. Letting out its, quote, special warning, end of quote, if anyone came by. And sure enough, Tom, after a short while, a crow landed on the tree. Little Brown Eye let up a frightful warning call, quote, waking Old Man up. So So old man rolls over, takes a look at this and thinks, "Pah, stupid little brown eye, he's woken me up for nothing," and goes back to
This
sleep.
is like a really vulgar version of that scene in Mission Impossible, where Tom Cruise is coming down from the ceiling trying to avoid those red beams. Except
he's just farting on them to show the red beams.
The red beams are the farts. The moment Tom Cruise touches one, it goes.
and a god awakens.
Feeling much lighter.
Yeah, feeling an incredible sense of relief. You can see why I picked this story, can't you?
Oh,
I'm very
definitely.
proud of myself for finding this. So, old man goes back to sleep, and shortly afterwards, a lynx comes up. Now, if you're not American, lynx is a big predatory wildcat. Sure enough, little brown eye, ever watchful, screams and screams and screams and farts away.
A squeaker.
A squeaker, a ripper, an SBD. He's trying everything to wake old man up. But old man is so deep asleep that he doesn't even stir as little brown eye screams away. And the lynx runs off with the meat. In the morning, old man is obviously furious. "You little shit," he cries, yelling at his own arse. You didn't wake me up. And he's so angry, Tom. He's so angry that he takes a red-hot stick from the fire and shoves it up little brown eye.
Again, cutting off your nose to spite your face a bit there.
yes, it is. And here's an origin story, Tom. This is how the willow came to be. The stick which he shoved up his own arse was made of willow, which forevermore was known to the Blackfoot as the stinky wood. That is a quote. The stinky wood. That's a quote, by the way, from the original source.
What, his arse? That was it. Oh.
That was the original source. Oh, there's a shower gel that's going to tingle. Three deictic Native American rectums went into making this bottle of original source shower gel.
Supplied by Crowther and Stockwell Company. Stealing indigenous arseholes since 1830.
Fancy a ring? Give us a call. Yes. So, following the trail of squirrel blood and grease through the bush, he quickly found the lynx who'd stolen it. He shouts at him. He says, "You stole my food, and now you'll be punished." He broke off part of the lynx's tail in anger.
All the time was he having like a Gollum-esque conversation with his own arse.
Yes, my precious.
Had you been watching now? Well, you were fucking busy fast asleep, weren't you? I was farting as loud as well. You didn't fart loud enough. I'm farting as loud as I bloody could.
I screamed and screamed and screamed.
Maybe if you ate more squirrel, I would have been able to produce a bit more fat. And I'd have been less hard to watch. Just do your job properly.
And what was left for me? Nothing. That's right. Just like there ever is. Never anything left for little brown eye, is there?
Just a bit of peat. Just a bit of tree branch. That's all I ever got.
So, yes, whilst he's arguing with his own arse, he rips the lynx's tail off in anger, leaving it with the short tail that it has today. He smashed its head against a rock repeatedly, like Vinnie Jones in Lock, Stock and Two Smoking Barrels, until its nose became flat, just like it is today. And then he grabbed hold of its back legs as it tried to get away until they stretched out long, giving the lynx its unique appearance. And, Tom, here's where I think the storytellers may have started messing with the fusty white academic translators around the campfire. Because as a finishing touch, old man rips off his pubes and shoves them up the cat's nose, giving it its whiskers.
Just as a final little insult.
Just as a final little insult, he rips off his pubes and jams them up the cat's nose.
He's causing himself a little bit of pain, isn't he?
He is, yes. He's not the brightest.
Quite happy to cause a little bit of pain to himself to cause a bit more pain to someone else.
Yes, he's not the plumpest sausage in the pack. Not the sharpest knife in the drawer. Incidentally, pubes is the word used in the original 1908 text.
Is it?
No flowery Victorian language here. Yeah, pubes is word for word. It's verbatim. No garden of matrimonial necessities.
Short and curlies.
Yes. So it's only at this point, now he'd had his revenge and his anger started to subside, that old man noticed that his bum was rather sore from having a hot poker shoved up it. And so he started hopping around in pain, trying to find some relief, until a gust of wind blew over his bum, soothing it and making him feel much better. Incidentally, by the way, he's naked, old man, due to being repeatedly shit on by angry birds in another story. You have to read the book, it's brilliant.
So right, okay. So he's busy doing a handstand beside a hairdryer at the moment. Is that what you said?
Yeah.
Well, a hand dryer in a
pretty
public
much,
toilet. Yeah. Oh, having arguments with his ass, doing a handstand.
Yeah, he's squatting over a Dyson Airblade.
Talking to his own ass.
Talking to his own
Eating
ass.
dead squirrels. Yep, we've all met this man in a public toilet.
I too like Weatherspoon's pubs. And so, noticing that the wind is cooling and soothing, he runs up to the top of the nearest mountain, and when he gets to the top, he demands that the wind blows and blows and blows, and so the wind kicks up an almighty storm, but it's still not enough relief for his burned and bubbling arse. Blow, 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 he shouts, and the wind blows until an almighty storm picks him up by the arse and flings him on the wind down the mountain, tumbling over and over and over until he reaches the bottom and crashes into a birch tree, which he was furious about for ruining his roly-polying fun, tumbling over and over, giggling away. So he cuts up the tree with his knife, giving Birch its unique appearance. He's a strange man. He's an odd man, Tom. I think we've established.
Giggling away as he talks to his ass.
Yeah. He's starting to get more and more like someone who would talk to you on a bus.
Yeah. Oh dear.
Now, the Blackfoot story doesn't mention this, but in the Winnebago version, at some point between shoving a cat full of his own pubes and hiking up a mountain, Trickster, as he's known to the Winnebago, old man to the Blackfoot, realises he's got even more problems. His insides are dragging along the ground behind him.
God.
Yes, by shoving the stick up his arse, he's prolapsed his own anus.
Something you can empathise with, eh, Sam?
Oh, yes. We sympathise.
Oh dear.
Oh, incidentally, actually, in medieval Europe, shoving a hot poker up your arse was a cure for hemorrhoids.
Was it?
So there you go. So no worries, he thinks, and he gathers up all of his innards, dusts them off, and pops them back in where they belong before trying to stitch Little Brown Eye back together. Unfortunately, Little Brown Eye's in a lot of pain by this point and won't stop twitching, so Trickster makes a right hash job of it. And that, Tom, is why bumholes are wrinkly to this day.
Oh, because that is something that throughout human history has needed explaining, hasn't it?
Yes, it has. Yes, it is, isn't it?
Don't worry about why the stars move in the sky, why the moon comes up at night and the sun goes down. Don't worry about that shit. Why have I got a wrinkly arsehole?
Yes. Asking the big questions. Answering the big questions.
You know what's weird about that question? Why have I got a wrinkly arsehole? It's not a question you can ask on your own, is it? Because you can't see your own arsehole.
No, you have to be observing someone else's arsehole. You have to think, you have a wrinkly arsehole. Do I have a wrinkly arsehole? Let's compare arseholes.
Possibly something considered while someone was rimming, you know?
Well, I didn't read into it that much, but I'll have to read the rest of the stories and
Find out if that's true. Unless...
Oh, do you know what? My favourite story on a kind of a vaguely sexual note is the story in which old man discovers what erections are. And... wakes up one morning wondering why someone's erected a flagpole under his blanket, pops it in a box, spots a princess.
What's the story, Morning Glory?
On the other side of the... yeah, well, quite. Spots a princess on the other side of a lake, gets his dick out of the box, skims his boner across the lake. Princess sees it, tries to twat it with a hammer.
Ash.
At which point, old man's penis gets so angry that it slaps her with such force it sends her flying through the air. That is, Tom, one of the great stories of Native American folklore. And
nice to know people have been skimming stones for so long.
Yes, well, quite.
Skimming stones must be one of the oldest forms of entertainment, mustn't it?
And by stones
rimming.
you mean testicles. Yes. So anyway, there we go, Tom. What a wild ride that story was. And I think I'm going to put it out there. I find that more entertaining than Psalms from the Bible. So as a religion, I think I'm going to convert. And what a frankly brilliant creation story for links, birch trees, and rectums in one go.
Fantastic, very, very. And how did your research take you down that route? I mean, we both started from the same point.
We reached very different conclusions.
I got nowhere near your conclusion.
That's a brilliant show of 6 degrees of separation. That's 6 degrees of separation in action.
Well, that's what That Was Genius is all about, isn't it, Sam?
Yes, it is. From the same point, wildly different stories emerge. I think I did genuinely Google mythology of the bum, and
I'm not surprised.
and had a look at what turned up. Because, well, do you know what it was? I think I was looking at relics still
looking
at that
someone's
point.
ass, and I was like, what is that?
I was doing a Google image search, and now I was looking up relics, and I think there is a relic of either someone's spleen or someone's intestines and rectum nailed to a board, which actually went on a tour of UK churches about 5 years ago. The spleen, anus, and intestines of some or other ancient saint. Off the back of that, I typed in mythology of the anus to see if there were any other kind of good stories about arses.
It's a good start. It's a cracking start. I wouldn't have even thought of such a good search term.
Well, you kind of have to trick Google now into giving you good results if you're looking for inspiration off the back of an internet search. If you type in mythology of the anus or myths of the anus, you get an awful lot of stuff about anal sex and various STDs. You have to go 6 or 7 pages back to get.
You have to sift through it, don't you? The other problem with Google is when you search it, you immediately get up heaps of cliche results. So if you type up history of body parts, you get up Abraham Lincoln. You get
Napoleon's dick.
Yeah. You get a whole list of the the standard ones. You've got to sift through all of those slightly clickbaity websites, then you get some juicy stuff. Yeah.
Juicy stuff is such a wonderful turn of phrase.
Juicy squirrely stuff. Tastes like roast squirrel. Very good.
Well, anyway, Tom, we go.
That was definitely 2 ends of the spectrum this week, wasn't it?
That was 2 ends of the spectrum.
And that's what you get.
Well, it actually literally was. The skull and the anus.
Yes.
2 ends of the spectrum and digestive tract.
But that's what listeners want, isn't it, Sam? We give them some.
I don't know if that's what listeners want.
Genuine history and something poignant to think about, and then something ridiculously rude and silly.
Well,
mix it all up.
We're mixing it up. In a way, I'm glad we went with that route, because if we'd both done something serious, it would have been a fucking depressing episode.
Very good. Have we had any more suggestions? Have we got to catch up on any suggestions?
I don't know. Someone was suggesting spying, but I think we've kind of done that a little bit in the past, haven't we? So I think we're in the clear. I'll go back and have a look.
I'm happy to do spying. Would you like to do espionage? I think that could be quite good.
Yeah, should we do espionage? What was the one? What did we do before?
We have done a spy-related one before, haven't we? Because you were talking about the US and the Soviet Union.
I did Juan Pujol Garcia at some point as well. He was a British spy. Yeah, let's do spying. Fuck it, let's do spying. Spying is.
Let's do spying. If we do it again, we do it again.
Yeah,
so be it.
Go on. Well, thank you so much for tuning in. Hopefully neither of these stories put you off too much, or both of them did, and now you've reached a beautiful yin-yang balance in your life. Do tune in next week for what is definitely going to be an interesting episode. And in the meantime, if you've got any topics for suggestion, do get in touch with us. You can find us on Twitter, _was_genius, on Instagram, that was genius, all one word, and on Facebook, that was genius podcast. You can also email us, thatwasgeniuscast@gmail.com. Right, say goodbye, Tom.
See you later.
Bye.